Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive.
It's great to be back.
Today we are going super deep.
That's right, deeper than we've ever gone before. You could even say
Oh,
we're diving into the deep end.
I knew you were going to say that.
Well, it's true.
Okay, so to get everyone up to speed, we are tackling a particularly mind-bending idea.
Mind-bending and maybe even a little controversial, but isn't that what we do best here?
I think so, yeah. We're going to be taking a close look at Neville Goddard's interpretation of
a Bible verse, but not just any verse.
It's a tricky one.
That's right, one that sparked debate for centuries. We're talking about Ecclesiastes 3.11.
The one about eternity being in the mind of man.
Exactly. God has put eternity into the mind of man.
And we're going to be relying heavily on
one of Goddard's most thought-provoking lectures,
which is called
Eternity in Man's Mind.
That's perfect. So our mission today is to
try and understand this infamous verse
through Goddard's unique lens.
And hopefully discover what he was trying to tell us about time.
About humanity.
About the divine.
It's a tall order.
It is, but I think we're up for the challenge.
Okay, so let's dive right in. We've got to start with this verse. Ecclesiastes 3.11.
Right. God has put eternity into the mind of man. But that's actually just a small piece of it.
Oh, right. Sorry. It's actually a pretty long verse.
It is. The full verse is, He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end.
Whoa. That's a lot to unpack.
It is. And Goddard jumps right in. He starts by focusing on that first part, where it says everything is beautiful in its time.
Right. So how does he interpret that?
Well, he basically says that every single event in our lives,
Every single one
yeah,
unfolds at its perfect.
in its own designated.
Like everything has its place.
And its time.
Exactly. But then he moves on to that second part of the verse.
Where it says that no one can fathom what God has done.
From beginning to end. And this is where it gets really interesting. Goddard suggests that
we as humans just aren't equipped to fully grasp God's plan.
Because we're limited by our own
perspective, our limited understanding.
We just can't see the bigger picture.
The whole tapestry.
And that's where that idea of predetermination comes in, right?
Yeah. That's a huge part of Goddard's interpretation.
Because if everything has its time,
and no one can understand God's plan,
doesn't that kind of imply that everything is
already decided? And Goddard doesn't shy away from that.
No, he doesn't. He actually says that Ecclesiastes teaches that everything is
predetermined, which I know can be a tough pill to swallow for some people.
It definitely goes against how a lot of people think about free will.
Right. But Goddard even goes so far as to say that.
Wait, hold on. I think we need to pause here for a second because this is
pretty major.
It is. And I know that the idea of predetermination can be a really sensitive topic for some people.
I get it. It can feel like it takes away our agency.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that we're just exploring Goddard's interpretation here.
We're not saying it's the only way to look at it.
Or even that we agree with it. It's just
food for thought.
Exactly. Okay, so
back to predetermination.
Goddard is firmly in that camp.
He is, and he even suggests that some of the verses in Ecclesiastes,
the ones that paint God as this vengeful judge.
Right. He believes those were actually added later. Like other people. He says they were inserted by
the religious leaders who maybe had a different agenda.
Yeah. Maybe they wanted to portray God in a more
authoritarian light.
Exactly. But Goddard insists that the real core message of Ecclesiastes
is actually much simpler.
And more life-affirming.
It's about enjoying life.
Yeah. Enjoying the good things like food and drink.
Finding satisfaction in your work.
Because in the end,
death comes for us all.
Kings and fools alike.
So there's no point in stressing over things you can't control.
It's an interesting perspective.
It is, and it ties in with that other verse from Ecclesiastes about
nothing new under the sun.
Right. Ecclesiastes 1.9. Can you remind us what that one says?
What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun.
So basically everything is just repeating itself.
In a never-ending cycle.
And Goddard points out that most people really resist this idea.
We like to believe that we're progressing.
That things are getting better.
That history is moving forward.
But Goddard is saying
it's not really the case. It's more like a wheel.
Just spinning and spinning.
And we're all just along for the ride.
Okay. So we've got this ancient text.
talking about predetermination and recurrence.
And then Goddard throws in this really unexpected curveball.
He does. He brings modern physics into the mix.
And he does it through this physicist,
Professor Richard Feynman.
who Goddard just raved about.
He did. He called Feynman a truly great physicist.
And it's because of Feynman's work with
antimatter, specifically the positron.
which is the antiparticle of the electron.
Yeah. And Feynman was observing these positrons.
And he noticed something really strange.
Something that just didn't make sense according to the traditional understanding of time.
Like what?
Well, he described it as if the positron was moving from where it hadn't been to where it was a moment before. And then its sense of time would reverse, sending it back to where it hadn't been. It's like it was traveling backwards in time.
Whoa. That's wild. So how does Goddard connect this to Ecclesiastes?
Because Feynman's observations led him to a radical conclusion.
That we need to rethink our whole concept of time.
Exactly. Feynman suggested that maybe the entire history of space-time is already laid out.
Like a giant map.
And we're just experiencing it one moment at a time.
Like we're traveling along a predetermined path.
And Goddard saw this as confirmation of what Koheleth was saying.
That everything is predetermined and recurring.
Yeah. Like Feynman was unknowingly echoing these ancient ideas.
That's amazing. Okay, so let's talk about Koheleth for a minute.
The mysterious author of Ecclesiastes.
Who is he?
Well, that's part of the mystery. No one knows for sure.
But we do know that he calls himself
The son of David, king in Jerusalem.
And Goddard latches onto that phrase.
He does, and he makes this really interesting connection to the New Testament.
Specifically to Jesus.
Who's also referred to as the son of David in the Gospels.
And even in Revelation.
Where Jesus says, I'm the root and the offspring of David, the bright morning star.
Okay, so Goddard sees a link between Koheleth and Jesus.
He does. And he interprets this as pointing toward
a deeper spiritual identity.
Right. Like these figures, separated by centuries,
are actually different facets of the same
divine reality. It's not necessarily a literal historical connection,
but a symbolic one.
Exactly. And this deeper meaning is also connected to that idea of eternity in Ecclesiastes 3.11.
The one that God puts in the mind of man.
Right. The Hebrew word for eternity is Olam.
Olam. And that word has a lot more to it than just
endless time. When you look it up in a Hebrew concordance,
it has all these other meanings.
Like something hidden.
Something kept out of sight.
To hide oneself.
Something veiled from sight.
And even a young man or a youth.
So it's not just about time.
It's about something much deeper.
Something hidden within us.
Exactly. And Goddard's central idea is that
when God put Olam into the mind of man,
he was actually placing a hidden part of himself
and his son,
who represents God's creative power,
inside every human being.
From the very beginning. He's saying that this hidden eternity is actually the key to understanding who we really are.
And Goddard also suggests that history itself,
which is also sometimes referred to as Olam,
is like this fusion of all human experience.
All the joys and sorrows of every generation.
All blended together into one big
tapestry.
And he believes that Koheleth saw this whole tapestry.
He saw the finished play.
And that's why he wasn't surprised by things like corruption.
Because he understood that it was all part of this
never-ending cycle.
Right. But Goddard also says that most people are completely oblivious to this.
Like we're sleepwalking through life.
Yeah. We have this kind of collective amnesia.
Okay, so Olam is not just about time.
It's about this hidden potential within us.
And the interconnectedness of all human experience.
Exactly. And to really drive this point home,
Goddard quotes William Blake,
the poet and mystic,
who wrote, "Eternity exists, and all things in eternity independent of creation."
And Goddard fully agrees with that. He says, all that I behold, though it appears without, it is within, in my imagination.
So he's saying that everything we experience
originates within our own consciousness.
It's all in our imagination.
And he takes it a step further. He says that the whole of creation,
the entire universe,
is actually contained within man.
Oh.
But the most important thing,
the thing that really matters,
is the presence of God the Father
and his Son,
who represents God's creative power and wisdom.
And this Son is often personified in the Bible as King David, the slayer of Goliath.
Right. But Goddard doesn't just see David as a historical figure.
No, he sees David as
an archetype. Exactly. He says that David represents the adventurer, the one who goes forward against all opposition and conquers. He's the embodiment of God's creative power in action.
Always striving, always overcoming challenges.
And Goddard believes that David's ultimate victory
His final triumph.
leads to the liberation of his father,
Who represents...
the dreamer within us all.
Okay, so how does Goddard connect all of this to that story in the Book of Samuel?
The one where King Saul asks about David.
After he's defeated Goliath?
Right. The king says to his general, Abner, whose son is that youth? And the word translated as youth, there's Olam.
Olam?
Yeah. The king keeps asking about the stripling and the young man, both translations of Olam.
So he's not just asking for David's name.
He's asking about his lineage.
His origin.
Like, who is this kid, really?
And David replies.
I am the son of your servant, Jesse the Bethlehemite.
And Goddard points out that the name Jesse means, I am.
The same name associated with Jehovah.
And Jesus.
Exactly. So he's tying it all together.
He's saying that the hidden mystery within us, this Olam, is actually God himself.
The I am.
And his creative power.
Embodied by David.
Okay. That's pretty mind-blowing.
It is. And then Goddard takes us even further down the rabbit hole.
Into the realm of death and resurrection.
Which he sees as symbolic processes.
Okay. How so?
Well, he believes that God entered death.
Which he equates with the human skull.
And from within
death, God sends forth his son.
His creative power, represented by David,
to battle.
And ultimately conquer death.
Which is seen as the ultimate enemy.
The final obstacle.
And he even references the Book of Revelation.
Where the morning star is promised to those who overcome.
And he quotes Revelation 22.1c.
Where Jesus says, I am the root and the offspring of David, the bright morning star.
So he's emphasizing that cyclical nature of return.
The idea that death is not the end.
But a transition.
A transformation.
And Goddard even shares this really personal experience.
He does. He talks about seemingly stopping the world.
And reversing its shadow.
Which he sees as proof of the immense power that resides within each of us.
Okay. That's incredible.
It is. But then he throws in another twist.
Oh, no. What now?
He brings up this idea of a second youth in Ecclesiastes.
A second youth?
Yeah. It's in Ecclesiastes 4.15.
What does that verse say?
Koheleth talks about witnessing the second youth who was to succeed him.
Okay.
But then he says that later generations would not rejoice in this second youth.
That's interesting.
And Goddard sees this as part of a bigger pattern in the Bible, where the second-born often takes precedence.
Like Abel over Cain.
Right.
Jacob over Esau.
And Ephraim over Manasseh.
So he's saying that this second youth is important.
He is. And he connects it to the parable of the prodigal son.
The second son who leaves home and then comes back.
Exactly. Goddard interprets the father's welcome.
The robe, the ring, the shoes.
As symbols of the prodigal son's regained freedom and authority.
Which represents
the return of that creative power.
Okay. So this return.
He's coming to his senses.
It's crucial.
It is. Because it's the key to breaking free from that endless cycle of recurrence.
We talked about earlier.
Right. While Ecclesiastes focuses on that cycle.
The New Testament introduces
repentance.
But not just repentance as in feeling sorry.
No. Goddard defines repentance as
a radical transformation in our attitude toward life.
Exactly. It's about changing our whole perspective.
And he believes that this fundamental shift
allows us to interfere with what he calls the mechanical structure of the brain.
And change the pattern of recurrence. So we're not just stuck in this loop.
We have the power to break free.
And this is where that second youth comes in.
Right. That's David.
Our inner creative power.
Conquering death and changing the course of history.
It's not about passively accepting fate.
It's about actively shaping it.
Through repentance and creative action.
Exactly.
And Goddard even brings in those verses from Isaiah.
The ones about the virgin birth and the everlasting father.
To emphasize that Olam is also connected to
some really significant figures.
Right. He points out that Olam is the Hebrew word for virgin in Isaiah 7.110.
Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel.
And then he references Isaiah 9.6.
For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and he will be called Everlasting Father.
And he makes a distinction between the child born and the son given.
He identifies the son given as David.
Our inner creative power.
Right. And he points out that Everlasting Father in Hebrew is Olam.
Which he says is placed directly within the mind of man. So it all comes back to Olam.
The hidden eternity within us.
Which contains both God the Father and his Son.
Who's sent through death to conquer it.
And ultimately awaken the Father from the dream of life. That's a lot to take in.
It is.
But it's also really empowering.
I think so too.
Because it suggests that we have this incredible potential within us,
That we're not just cogs in a machine.
but co-creators of our own reality.
Exactly. And Goddard constantly stresses that his teachings are rooted in his own personal experience.
As he details in his pamphlet, He Breaks the Shell.
He really believed that personal experience was the foundation of true understanding,
And that's why he places so much emphasis on imagination.
which he saw as the divine power within us,
He famously said that God is all imagination
and therefore so is man.
because God and man are one.
And he explains that Olam, as something hidden, relates to the fact that the creative power of imagination remains hidden because the world at large doesn't truly believe in its transformative potential.
So if we want to unlock that hidden potential,
We have to start by believing in the power of our own imagination,
to believe that we can change our reality,
by changing our thoughts and beliefs.
which is easier said than done,
It is, but it's the key to breaking free from the cycle of recurrence.
and becoming the masters of our own destiny.
Exactly.
Wow. I think we've covered a lot of ground today,
We have.
and I hope our listeners are feeling just as energized as I am,
I hope so too.
because Goddard's interpretation of Ecclesiastes 3.11 is a powerful reminder.
That we all have this hidden eternity within us,
Olam.
which contains both God and his creative power,
And that through repentance,
and a conscious engagement with our imagination,
we can tap into that power.
and reshape our reality
It's a message of hope.
and possibility.
So as we wrap up,
I want to leave you with one final thought.
okay?
If eternity and your creative potential are already within you,
Hidden in plain sight.
how might you engage with that hidden dimension in your daily life?
What patterns might you choose to reshape?
Knowing that the power to do so lies within your own imagination.
That's something to think about.
It is, and we encourage you to explore Neville Goddard's work,
And see what resonates with you.
because you never know
You might just discover something amazing.
about yourself and the world around you.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time,
Keep diving deep.
stay curious.